So we're talking with Ivan Vukovic, who has written an article for the special issue on censuses in post-Yugoslav space for contemporary Southeastern Europe, focusing on Montenegro. Looking back at the censuses in Montenegro over the last decades, what are the main trends you observe in your study?
I think first of all we need to acknowledge the fact that the results of those censuses were very different depending on the time period in which they were organized. So if we look at the 20th century history, there's hardly any rule that you can get out of it if you take them individually. However, my idea was to place the census results in the given political context in order to explain how come that we had such diverging outcomes. So I think the main issue in Montenegro is this national cleavage within this Orthodox segment of the population, Montenegro on the one hand and Serb on the other. So there I've identified a clear negative causal relationship between the two, i.e. As much as the number of Montenegrins would increase, the number of Serbs would drop, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. A similar trend we can observe within the Muslim part of the Montenegrin population lately, starting in 2003, when there was the first time we had Bosniaks as a separate national group in the census. Again, as much as Muslims as a nationality, which was constituted in the communist period, as much as they would drop in number, the Bosniaks would increase, and vice versa. So I think these are the two patterns we can follow. And again, they depend, especially the former, on the political context. I've also following that line of thought, my argument was that throughout the modern Montenegrin history, the results of the population censuses actually reflected the political changes that the country had undergone lately, especially after the renewal of state independence. We can see the reversed process, i.e. the effect of the census results on the political game in Montenegro, due to the fact that now we have a number of national political parties that pretty much base their political demands on the results of the population censuses. So these are more or less the rules, mm-hmm. I think, when it comes to political processes, mm-hmm. in the context of the population censuses.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the elements, of course, as you mentioned, the fluctuation of identification among the, let's say, Orthodox population of Montenegro, shifting from overwhelmingly Montenegrin in the socialist period to a significant share identifying as Serbs. Do you see this trend as, because I mean the shift between the last census and the previous one is not as dramatic as it was before then. Is there a certain sense of consolidation of these identities in the census categories, do you believe, or do you think they're still as much in flux as they were between, let's say, the 90s and early 2000s?
I think it's fair to say that we are witnessing their consolidation, as you mentioned, precisely because of this insignificant difference when it comes to the results of 2003 and 2011 censuses, especially compared to the earlier periods. So within the last 10, 15 years, we have not had such dramatic shifts as before. So I think it's fair to say that this national cleavage clearly reflected and deeply embedded has become a part of our political reality. In the earlier period, as I pointed out in my paper, we had a situation in which being Montenegrin and being Serb was not mutually exclusive, i.e. There were many people who felt being both at the same time, and it has changed, in particular after 2003, and now in 2011 we see that trend being still in place. So I think these two national groups are there to stay when it comes to this Orthodox corpus of our population, and it will have certain political consequences, of course. So yes, I do think that there has been a substantial change going on in this sense, unlike the previous period where this difference was kind of blurry.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in Montenegro, like elsewhere in the post-Yugoslav states, the most important questions are always the so-called sensitive questions of
Yeah.
ethnicity, language, and religion. Although in Montenegro, arguably, it's less. There's less political consequences of sizes as it is, let's say, in Bosnia or Kosovo, where the direct quota is linked to population size. So, what makes this identity question particularly salient? I mean, in terms of political controversy. I mean, there was a whole campaigns of different national parties before the census. What is the significance in numbers? Let's say beyond the Serb-Montenegrin divide.
Yeah. Well, it is true that Montenegro has embarked on the process of like civic state building, unlike the countries in the region that you mentioned. So at least officially, it shouldn't really matter, which national group you belong to in terms of your political rights. And I think it's some kind of a good heritage, even from the 1990s, where Montenegro has managed to preserve peace and this multi-ethnic stability. And it was reconfirmed in the referendum campaign, where pretty much all the national parties, all the non-Serb national parties, aligned with the independence movement, and that was the basis for the future constitutional building of Montenegro. So in that sense, we still do have a situation where in each government after the referendum we saw a number of Albanian, Croatian, Bosniak national parties. The problem is, the problem given the constitutional character of the Montenegrin society, is that we hear more and more demands like those that we have in, perhaps not in Bosnia and Macedonia, but the echo is similar. The demands for greater political representation, etc., etc. So, and I think it's going to be very hard to reconcile the two, i.e., the political practice in this sense and what's been written in the constitution. And so far it has worked somehow, because these minority parties representatives have been more or less satisfied with the current situation, but they also have aspirations that go far beyond where they stand right now. So I think in the future it will become a political issue. I hope not as dramatic as in these two countries that you mentioned.
There's also a significant number of Montenegrins who make these kind of choices which don't fit into the main ideological cleavages. So many Montenegrins say they speak Serbian. There's also a significant number of people who have undecided or not declared their national identity. Do you see also some degree of citizens maybe rejecting or taking a more skeptical view of these categories, which are presented always as kind of very coherent units, right? Montenegrins speak Montenegrin, Serbs speak Serbian, Bosniaks speak Bosnian, and are Muslims. Is this coherence really something which is more of a top-down idea, or so I'm just wondering how citizens respond to or how much these are realities on the ground.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a mismatch between the religious structure of the society on the one hand and the national structure of the society on the other. For instance, there are many Montenegrins who claim to speak Serbian, or who are members of the Serbian Orthodox Church, etc. So I think it reminds me of this previous period that I mentioned, and it shows that for a certain number of people in Montenegro, the old way of thinking is still to a certain degree, to a certain extent, acceptable. So being Montenegrin, while at the same time belonging to the Serbian Orthodox Church, for which, interestingly enough, Montenegrins do not really exist as a separate nation. So I mean, it's one of the very complex phenomenon of Montenegrin social and political life. The same goes for the language when it comes to the Bosniaks and Muslims, many of whom also claim to speak Montenegrin, for instance, and not Bosniak. So there are these varieties, and again, to understand them, you really need to look closer to the political context and all these turbulent political turbulences that are behind us that kind of gave birth to to perhaps a sense of confusion, among some people when it comes to their identity in general. So you're right. So what national structure or declare national structure is one thing, religious is another, linguistic is also something else. So it's a small place, but at the same time, when you take everything into account, it turns out being very complicated for an analysis of this sort.
Yes, indeed. Well, and you've given a very good overview in the article about exactly these historical trends and developments. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts now, and also for the article, where there's of course a lot more material for reflection. And indeed, as you rightly pointed out, Montenegrin case is one which is quite fascinating and relevant, and shows some different angles than you would expect from the other countries of the region. So I think that's what makes it particularly worth looking into in more detail. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to write for a journal and to talk about these issues.
Well, thank you.